The Maxwell estate had never been quieter than on the day of Edward Maxwell's funeral. The great halls, usually echoing with laughter and arguments, seemed smaller, almost afraid to breathe without their master. Old portraits stared down at the gathered family, their painted eyes full of secrets. Margaret Maxwell, Edward's widow, sat at the front of the grand drawing room, her posture perfect, but her hands twisting a lace handkerchief in her lap. She had been the unshakable center of the family for decades, but today her face was pale and tight, as if the whole world had narrowed to a single terrifying point. What came next? Lucas Maxwell, her eldest son, stood near the window, jaw set, shoulders tense. He was the heir everyone expected, handsome, ambitious, and proud. Chloe, his younger sister, kept to the edge of the room, arms folded, eyes down, as though hoping no one would notice her at all. Uncle Richard, Edward's younger brother, hovered by the fireplace, his smile thin and sharp as a knife, already speculating about what he might claim for himself now that Edward was gone. The rest of the family and a few close staff milled quietly about, their conversations hushed. The air was thick with nerves and anticipation, not just for the loss, but for the will reading scheduled that afternoon. Even in grief, the Maxwells could not help but wonder about inheritance. As the clock struck 3, the family lawyer, Mr. Alden, arrived, a stack of sealed envelopes in his hands. The room fell into a tense silence as he set his briefcase on the table. "If you're all ready, I'll begin," he announced, his voice steady but unreadable. Margaret drew a slow breath and nodded. Lucas straightened, expectant. Uncle Richard tried and failed to hide his eagerness. No one noticed the small, cream-colored envelope at the bottom of Mr. Alden's stack, marked simply, "For Emily Carter." But when the time came, that single envelope would change everything the Maxwells thought they knew about themselves, their fortune, and the legacy of Edward Maxwell. And far across town in a modest apartment, a young woman named Emily Carter was about to discover the truth that would upend not only her life, but the life of everyone at Maxwell Manor. The mood in the drawing room was a tangled web of anxiety and expectation as Mr. Alden began to read Edward Maxwell's will. His voice was calm and measured, but each sentence seemed to land with the weight of a stone. Margaret's knuckles whitened around her handkerchief. Lucas watched every word as if waiting for the verdict of a trial. Edward's possessions, his art collection, his investments, the elegant cars, and the summer home by the lake were doled out, name by name. Lucas was granted the lion's share, as expected, and Chloe received a generous trust, though not as much as her brother. Uncle Richard's lips tightened as he was awarded only a modest annual allowance. But Mr. Alden paused as he reached the final envelope, and the tension in the room grew thick. "There remains one final matter," Mr. Alden announced, holding up the cream-colored envelope. "Edward Maxwell has named a third heir, who is to share equally in the Maxwell fortune and estate, alongside Lucas and Chloe." For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was so deep it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "Who?" Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper, but it trembled with dread. Who could he possibly mean? Mr. Alden cleared his throat. "Her name is Emily Carter." The name meant nothing to most of the family, but Margaret's face drained of color. Richard's eyes gleamed with curiosity, and Lucas all but erupted from his seat. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of mistake?" he snapped. Chloe stared, wide-eyed, sensing the shape of a secret she'd never imagined. "You're saying there's another sibling?" she whispered. Before anyone could protest, Mr. Alden produced documents, letters, a birth certificate, and a scheduled DNA test result, explaining that Emily Carter, aged 25, was Edward's daughter by a relationship before his marriage to Margaret. Edward had supported Emily's mother quietly but never acknowledged Emily publicly. With the reading complete, the room broke into chaos. Richard pressed for details. Lucas railed against the idea of splitting the inheritance. Margaret demanded to see the evidence herself, and Chloe quietly wondered about the sister she never knew she had. Meanwhile, across town, Emily Carter was coming home from work, her hair windblown and her coat damp from the rain. She checked her mailbox and found a thick envelope stamped with the Maxwell Law Firm's logo. Inside, she discovered an official letter inviting her to Maxwell Manor for the reading of Edward Maxwell's will. Her heart pounded as she read. She knew her mother had kept secrets about her father, but this was more than she'd ever imagined. Emily confronted her mother that evening, her voice trembling. "You said he was gone, that he didn't care. Was it all a lie?" Her mother looked at her with tired, sad eyes. "He loved you in his own way. He was just afraid, afraid of what his family would say. But he always provided for us, even if he couldn't be there." Emily didn't know what to feel. Anger, confusion, hope, all swirled together as she stared at the invitation. "Do you think I should go?" she asked. Her mother nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind Emily's ear. "You deserve to know where you come from." Back at Maxwell Manor, the news of the secret heir swept through the halls like wildfire. The staff whispered behind closed doors, cousins speculated in huddled corners, and every phone in the house seemed to ring with some new rumor. Margaret locked herself in her room, old fears twisting in her chest. Richard paced the study, already plotting how he might use the newcomer to his advantage. Lucas drank alone, his anger simmering, while Chloe sat at the window, quietly waiting, wondering what kind of person Emily Carter would turn out to be. And so, as the family steeled themselves for her arrival, Emily packed her modest suitcase, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She was about to step into a world of wealth, rivalry, and secrets, a world that had shaped her life from afar, and which would now demand a place for her within it. The Maxwells, for all their power and pride, had never been more vulnerable. With Emily's arrival, every hidden truth, every old grudge, and every hope for the future would come crashing into the open, whether they were ready or not. Emily Carter's taxi rolled up the long driveway of Maxwell Manor, its tires crunching over gravel older than she was. The estate was even grander in person. Massive stone columns, windows glinting in the afternoon sun, ivy curling along the walls like green lace. Emily stared out the window as she paid the driver, feeling both nervous and oddly detached, as if she were watching someone else's life from the outside. She gripped the handle of her battered suitcase tightly, her heart thudding. The front door swung open, and a uniformed housekeeper greeted her. "Miss Carter?" the woman asked, both curious and wary. "Yes, Emily began, but the words stuck in her throat. The housekeeper gestured her inside. "They're waiting for you." Inside, the grand entryway was filled with hushed voices, tense glances, and the faint scent of lilies left over from the funeral. Emily felt every eye on her as she entered the drawing room. Margaret Maxwell stood first, cool and regal, her face unreadable. Lucas and Chloe flanked her, while Uncle Richard lounged near the fireplace, one eyebrow arched with open curiosity. Mr. Alden the lawyer stepped forward to make introductions, but the air was thick with judgment before a word was spoken. "So you're the secret," Lucas said, tone sharp and edged. Emily looked at him, meeting his glare. "I suppose I am," she replied quietly, determined not to shrink. Margaret's gaze was like frost. "You have your father's eyes," she said, and for a moment her voice trembled, revealing a crack in her composure. "But you don't belong here, not yet." Chloe's expression was more open, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and something gentler. Uncle Richard just smiled as if he were watching a show. Mr. Alden explained the will and Emily's legal status. He presented the birth certificate, old letters in Edward's handwriting, and confirmation that a DNA test had proved Emily's parentage beyond doubt. The evidence was irrefutable, but the atmosphere was anything but accepting. Lucas was openly hostile, making snide comments about gold diggers and bastards. Margaret retreated to her room, unable to process the reality that her husband's infidelity had left a living legacy. Chloe lingered in the hallway, sneaking glances at Emily as she explored the edges of her new world. That first night, Emily sat alone in a guest bedroom, staring at the faded wallpaper, wishing she could disappear. She tried to call her mother but got only voicemail. Her only comfort was a letter she found tucked in her suitcase, her mother's neat handwriting urging her to be brave and find the truth. Over the next few days, Emily was swept up in a whirlwind of family politics. At meals, the conversation was always sharp, polite on the surface, but barbed beneath. Staff eyed her with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. Uncle Richard became oddly friendly, offering sly advice about how to handle the Maxwells, while hinting that alliances could be useful. Chloe was the only one who treated her kindly. One afternoon, Chloe found Emily wandering the gardens. I never thought I'd have a sister, she admitted, sitting beside her on a stone bench. Dad never spoke about you, but I think he wanted to. Emily looked at her, surprised by the confession. Did you like him? Chloe was silent a moment, then shrugged. He was complicated, loving and distant at the same time. He expected too much from everyone, including himself. In the days that followed, Emily slowly uncovered more of her father's hidden life. Through whispered conversations with staff and late-night talks with Chloe, she pieced together how Edward had met her mother years before his marriage to Margaret. He had fallen in love, but the pressure of family legacy and Margaret's father's disapproval had forced him to end the relationship. Still, he had tried to provide for Emily and her mother, quietly sending money and gifts, even as he built his public life elsewhere. But not everyone was interested in the past. Lucas ramped up his efforts to discredit Emily, calling her a fraud, accusing her mother of lies, even suggesting to Mr. Alden that the DNA test might have been tampered with. Uncle Richard egged him on, hoping to benefit from the chaos. Margaret withdrew from the daily business of the house, haunted by her own doubts, not just about Edward's betrayal, but about the kind of woman she herself had become. Despite the hostility, Emily made small connections. She helped the housekeeper organize the storeroom. She sat with an elderly gardener, listening to stories about Edward's childhood. She noticed the staff were paid late and that the villagers who once depended on the Maxwells now avoided the estate. Slowly, she realized that the family's fortune was more fragile than it seemed. Then came the formal family dinner, the first with Emily at the table. The air was thick with tension as Margaret picked at her food and Lucas barely contained his anger. Chloe tried to bridge the silence, but the effort was futile. Finally, Lucas snapped, slamming his fork down. You don't belong here. You never will. Go back to where you came from. Emily held her ground, her voice steady. I didn't ask for any of this. I only want to know the truth about my father. Richard's lips curled in amusement, watching the drama unfold. Margaret rose abruptly from the table and left the room, shoulders shaking. That night, Chloe found Emily crying quietly in her room. You don't have to do this alone, Chloe whispered. They may never accept you, but I'm glad you're here. Emily managed a weak smile. You're the only one who is. It was during these long, lonely nights that Emily started to find hidden corners of the manor, her father's study, long untouched. A box of letters he'd written but never sent. Confessions of regret and apologies to the daughter he'd never had the courage to claim. She realized her father was as much a prisoner of the family's secrets as she now felt herself to be. One morning, as she sat reading on the back terrace, Margaret approached her for the first time since the dinner. She sat in silence beside Emily for a long while before finally speaking. This house was built on pride and secrets, Margaret said quietly. But I won't let it destroy what's left of my family. She fixed Emily with a steady gaze. I don't know if I can ever forgive Edward. But if you want a place here, you'll have to earn it. Not just from me, but from all of us. It was a challenge, not a welcome. But for Emily, it was also the first glimmer of hope. She folded her mother's letter in her lap and looked up at the sprawling estate, vowing to prove that she belonged, not just by blood, but by the strength of her character. Little did she know, the hardest tests were still ahead, and the secrets buried deepest in the Maxwell legacy were about to come to light. The days that followed Margaret's challenge blurred together in a storm of unfamiliar routines. Emily soon discovered that earning her place meant much more than simply surviving the Maxwell's cold stares. Each morning, she was expected to join family meetings about the Maxwell businesses, boardroom gatherings where she barely understood the jargon and where Lucas made no secret of his irritation every time she asked a question. Margaret observed everything with chilly detachment, while Uncle Richard sipped coffee in the corner, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Only Chloe made Emily feel less like an intruder. She patiently explained the basics of the business, The estate's declining profits, the tension with local villagers, and the staff layoffs looming on the horizon. Father never trusted anyone outside the family with these matters, Chloe confided one evening. But I think he was lonely too. Maybe he wanted someone to challenge him. Margaret had set the terms. Emily must live at Maxwell Manor for a full month, attend every business meeting, and shadow both Lucas and Chloe as they managed different aspects of the estate. She must also attend the local town council meetings to understand the community's grievances, many of which had gone ignored for years. If, by the end of the month, the family board and Margaret herself agreed that Emily had shown integrity and competence, she would officially receive her share of the inheritance and be welcomed as a Maxwell. It was a daunting challenge. Lucas made sure it was harder. He took every opportunity to undermine her, sometimes in small, sly ways, like giving her the wrong start time for meetings or failing to pass along important files. At other times, his sabotage was almost brazen. Once, during a meeting with local suppliers, he contradicted every suggestion Emily made, even the sensible ones, until she was left flustered and silent. The staff, uncertain of their own positions, kept their distance at first. But Emily's willingness to help, whether in the kitchen with the cooks or in the fields with the workers, slowly began to turn some heads. Uncle Richard hovered at the edges, offering sly advice. "Careful, Emily," he'd murmur as they passed in the hallway. "The Maxwell pride is a hard thing to break, but you seem determined." Emily soon realized Richard had his own agenda. She noticed him whispering to staff, dropping hints about Emily's background, and once overheard him warning a groundskeeper, "Don't get too close. She won't be here long." But the more obstacles she faced, the more Emily found her resolve hardening. She stayed late every night, reading old reports, learning about the company's history, and brainstorming ideas. She met with villagers who told her bluntly, "The Maxwells used to care about us. Now they don't listen at all." Emily apologized for things she hadn't done and promised only what she believed she could deliver. Her honesty began to win people over. Chloe became her closest ally. One afternoon, the two sisters walked through the orchard, Chloe carrying a notebook, Emily carrying a heavy heart. "It's not just you," Chloe admitted. "Lucas treats me like a child, too. He can't imagine a world where he isn't in charge." Emily smiled weakly. "At least you've always been here. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting a battle I never chose." Chloe squeezed her hand. "Maybe we both are." One evening, Emily stumbled upon a group of staff whispering in the kitchen. The head cook, Mrs. Green, pulled Emily aside. "Be careful, dear. Not everyone here wants you to succeed, but there are some of us who hope you do." That night, a note was slipped under Emily's door. "Don't trust Richard. He's trying to frame you for missing funds." Panic fluttered in her chest, but she kept the warning to herself. A week later, during an important audit meeting, Lucas accused Emily of mishandling a small charity fund meant for local schools. The evidence seemed damning. A missing ledger, a suspicious bank transfer. Emily, blindsided, denied any wrongdoing. The board was divided. Margaret's eyes were cold and Lucas's triumphant. But Chloe stood up, her voice steady. "Emily was with me that day. She had no access to those files." Richard's mouth twitched in annoyance. Later, Chloe and Emily discovered the missing ledger in Richard's office. Chloe slipped it back where it belonged, and the funds were restored. Lucas, embarrassed but unwilling to apologize, doubled down on his efforts to make Emily look foolish. Despite all the sabotage, Emily had moments of real connection. She visited the village school, promising to restore funding for books. She listened to an elderly gardener, Mr. Holman, who'd worked the estate all his life. "Your father had a good heart, Miss Emily. He just got lost in all this." Emily asked him to plant a new apple tree in Edward's memory, and together they chose a spot in the orchard. Word of her kindness spread quietly. Late one night, exhausted and overwhelmed, Emily wandered into her father's old study. Dust motes danced in the shaft of moonlight across the old desk. She opened a drawer and found a stack of letters, written but never sent. Apologies to Emily's mother, regrets over missed birthdays, promises he never kept. Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks as she realized how much pain and guilt her father had carried, and how it had shaped not only her own life but everyone's around him. In the final week of her trial, a sudden storm swept through the region, flooding the lower fields and damaging the estate's crops. Emily sprang into action, organizing volunteers from the village, helping save as much of the harvest as possible, and coordinating donations for families whose homes were threatened. Lucas, seeing his authority fading, tried to take charge, but the villagers listened to Emily now. Margaret watched all of it, her careful mask cracking as she saw her late husband's spirit reflected in Emily's determination and empathy. One night, as the storm finally broke, Margaret came to Emily's room. She looked tired but softer. "You remind me of the girl I used to be," she said quietly. "When I first married Edward, I thought I could handle anything, but I wasn't brave enough to fight for what mattered. You are." Emily, startled by the confession, could only nod, emotion thick in her throat. The month drew to a close with a final challenge. Emily would have to present her plan for restoring the Maxwell business to the family board and local partners. Lucas, cornered and desperate, planned one last attempt to discredit her, anonymously sending documents to the press, hoping to ruin her reputation before she could even begin. But Chloe, now fully on Emily's side, warned her just in time. Together, they confronted Lucas, and for the first time, Emily saw not just anger, but fear and loneliness in his eyes. "You're scared they'll love me," Emily whispered. "But they'll never stop loving you, Lucas. I don't want your place. I want my own." As the night faded into dawn, Emily felt a surge of confidence. For the first time since arriving at Maxwell Manor, she knew that she truly had the strength to fight for her place, not just as an heir, but as someone who could help heal a broken family. The last week at Maxwell Manor felt like standing on the edge of a storm. The day of Emily's final presentation drew closer, and with it came a tension that could be felt in every room. Rumors flew among staff and family about Lucas's anger, Richard's schemes, even about Margaret herself. The air was thick with questions that no one wanted to ask out loud. Emily prepared for her presentation in the library, surrounded by stacks of reports and Chloe's handwritten notes. Late one night, Chloe slipped in, her face anxious. "Be careful," she whispered. "Lucas is desperate. I heard him arguing with Richard. They're planning something, maybe even to sabotage the presentation." Emily closed her folder and sighed. "I'm tired of fighting, Chloe. I just want a chance to be myself, not prove myself over and over." Chloe squeezed her hand. "You've already changed more here than you realize. Even Mother is different now, but Lucas, he's afraid, not just of you, of losing what little he thinks he has." The next morning, disaster struck. An anonymous tip reached the local paper, accusing Emily of embezzling funds from the family's charity account. Margaret was furious. Lucas played innocent, and Richard poured fuel on the fire, calling for Emily's removal from the family board before her plan could even be heard. For a moment, it seemed Emily would be cast out without a chance to defend herself. But Chloe acted quickly, rallying both staff and the family's accountant. Together, they traced the evidence back to files accessed from Lucas's laptop, and the missing money had never left the estate's accounts at all. It was a manufactured scandal. Cornered at last, Lucas broke down in front of the family. "I was never enough for Dad. I thought if I lost everything to a stranger." His voice shook with real pain. For the first time, Margaret did not scold him. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You have always been my son, but the Maxwells cannot go on living in the shadow of old wounds." Richard, exposed for manipulating both siblings, tried to defend himself, but Margaret's look was icy. "You have no place here, Richard. Not anymore." The decision was final. The staff, tired of Richard's bullying, quietly helped pack his bags. As the house settled, Emily considered leaving. The public humiliation, Lucas's betrayal, and the weight of being the outsider felt almost unbearable. She sat alone in the garden, reading her father's unsent letter one more time. Chloe found her there and sat beside her in silence. "You belong here more than anyone, Emily. You're the only one who ever fought for this family without expecting anything in return." Margaret joined them, her face gentler than it had ever been. "I'm sorry for everything," she said. I spent so long trying to hold this family together by force. I didn't see how much love and forgiveness we needed instead. Please stay, for me, for all of us. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes, her heart finally letting go of the fear that had haunted her since the day she opened Mr. Alden's letter. The following day, Lucas apologized to Emily in private. He looked smaller, younger, without the armor of anger and pride. I was wrong. You aren't here to take anything from me. Maybe you're what we all needed, a chance to start over. Emily accepted his apology, feeling a weight lift from both of them. As the day of her presentation arrived, the Maxwells were no longer a house divided. There was pain and history, yes, but there was also the fragile beginning of trust. Emily stood in the study that morning, Chloe and Margaret at her side, and realized that no matter what happened next, she had finally claimed her place, not just in the family, but in her own story. The morning of the family board meeting arrived clear and bright, a soft sunlight spilling across the Maxwell Manor grounds. For the first time since her arrival, Emily Carter felt calm as she walked into the stately dining room, her plan for the business held firmly in her hands. She paused at the doorway, listening to the gentle hum of voices, staff setting up refreshments, Chloe giving last-minute encouragement, Margaret quietly overseeing the preparations. Lucas was there too, no longer scowling, but watching Emily with a cautious respect. The room filled with family, local partners, and members of the board. There was an expectant hush as Margaret called the meeting to order. She looked around the table, her gaze softening when it rested on Emily. Before we begin, she said, I want to thank everyone here for your patience and honesty during a difficult time. Today we look not to the past, but to the future. Emily, the floor is yours. Emily stood, her heart beating a steady rhythm. She took a breath and began. I came here as a stranger, and many of you saw me as a threat. I understand that. I've learned more in the last month about family, history, and forgiveness than I did in a lifetime before. But I also see an opportunity, a way for the Maxwells to be leaders in this community again, not just by tradition, but by real example. She outlined a plan to modernize the business, investing in sustainable practices, rebuilding relationships with local farmers and villagers, setting up a trust to support education for workers' families, and ensuring that profits were shared more fairly. She proposed opening the estate grounds for community events and festivals, making Maxwell Manor a place of gathering rather than isolation. This house and business should mean something good for everyone, Emily finished, not just for us. The room was quiet for a moment, then a wave of conversation began. Board members nodding, local partners exchanging hopeful glances, staff looking at each other with relief. Lucas stood. I fought her every step, he admitted. But she's right. We've forgotten what it means to be Maxwells. I want to help her rebuild that. Chloe smiled, tears in her eyes. Margaret wiped her own eyes discreetly, her heart swelling with pride and a tinge of regret for lost years. The board voted unanimously to accept Emily's proposal, and with that, the tide truly turned. Afterward, Margaret called Emily aside to the rose garden where the morning sun fell in soft petals of gold. Your father made mistakes, Margaret said. So did I, but I'm proud to call you my daughter. I hope you'll stay. Emily hugged her, overwhelmed by the simple power of being wanted. That afternoon, the family gathered for a meal in the garden. For the first time, there was laughter without tension. Stories shared, plans made, old memories dusted off and retold. The staff joined them, Ben the gardener proudly recounting Emily's help during the flood. Chloe and Emily talked about planting new apple trees together, and Lucas, still shy but sincere, thanked Emily for bringing us back to ourselves. Uncle Richard's absence was hardly noted, except as a relief. The following days were full of new beginnings. Emily worked with Chloe to set up the community fund. Lucas took over rebuilding the estate's relationship with local suppliers, finally learning to listen and compromise. Margaret began visiting the village herself, apologizing where needed and inviting old friends to return. The estate, once cold and distant, began to feel alive again. Emily took time to visit her mother, sharing the news that she had found her place, and more importantly, found herself. Her mother wept and laughed, relieved to see her daughter whole and at peace. Your father would have been proud, she said, holding Emily close. Emily knew that might be true, but she also understood that legacy was something you built, not just something you inherited. As summer deepened, the Maxwells hosted their first festival on the manor grounds. Children played games, farmers sold their goods, and music floated through the air. Emily stood beside Chloe and Lucas, smiling as she watched families dancing beneath the old oak trees. Margaret, resplendent in a bright dress, gave a speech welcoming everyone as part of the Maxwell family. When evening fell and the guests drifted home, Emily lingered in the quiet garden. Chloe joined her, slipping an arm around her shoulders. You did it, she whispered. Emily shook her head. We did it, all of us. She felt a sense of peace settle inside her, stronger and truer than anything money or a family name could provide. For the first time, Emily understood that being a Maxwell meant more than sharing blood. It meant opening your heart, facing the truth, and finding the courage to forgive, not just others, but yourself. As the lanterns twinkled in the trees and laughter echoed in the night air, Emily looked up at the manor, her home at last, and knew that she truly belonged. Months passed, and the changes at Maxwell Manor grew roots that no storm could shake. The once stiff halls now echoed with genuine laughter and open doors. The staff moved with new confidence, and the village's children ran freely through the gardens. Emily often woke to the distant hum of workers' voices and the sight of fresh flowers on the breakfast table, small gestures that felt like love. The Maxwell businesses slowly stabilized under Lucas and Emily's shared leadership, while Chloe's scholarship program gave young people a chance their parents never dreamed of. Margaret became a familiar face at village gatherings, quick to offer a warm smile or listen to a neighbor's concern. The Maxwell legacy, once guarded by pride and secrets, grew into something generous and bright. On a golden afternoon in late summer, Emily walked through the orchard with her mother, who had come to visit. They paused beneath the young apple tree planted for Edward. You've made a home here, her mother said, her voice proud. Emily squeezed her hand. I think I've found my family, too. Later that evening, the family and villagers gathered for a harvest supper on the lawn. Lanterns glowed among the trees, and music floated on the warm breeze. Margaret gave a simple toast to forgiveness, to family, and to new beginnings. Glasses clinked, and the air filled with hope. As the moon rose, Chloe and Lucas danced with the village children, and Margaret watched, content. Emily stepped away for a moment, letting the night wrap her in gentle quiet. She gazed at the manor, its windows aglow, and felt the steady beat of belonging in her chest. She realized finally that she had not just claimed her place by blood or by law, but by the love and trust she'd built, step by step, through storms and doubts. The Maxwell's story was no longer about secrets or rivalry, but about how a family, no matter how broken, could mend, forgive, and grow. Emily looked up at the sky, the stars sharp and endless. She smiled, knowing that every ending is also a beginning, and that home is not a place you're born into, but a place you make and remake, with every brave, honest choice. The end.